What's up guys? So today's video is one that Dave has been very keen for us to make for a while now, and this is going to cover rooting or grounding yourself into the floor. And the reason that he's so keen for us to get this information out there is because every time we do a training event, whether it's to train your ass off or whatever it might be, there are two sections that people always come away and say that they were kind of groundbreaking or kind of like a breakthrough for them, and that always ends up being bracing and rooting or grounding. Now, we already got a pretty comprehensive video on bracing, which is taken from a recent Train Your Ass Off video. Noah can probably put the link up somewhere in here. If you haven't watched that one yet, go and watch that one first, because in reality, bracing and rooting are kind of interdependent on each other. And if you don't do them both correctly, you don't get the best out of either. So what we're gonna do here is now add the other half of the equation in to help make you more stable no matter what it is you're doing. Now, when we're referring to grounding or rooting, most people will just think of their feet gripping the floor, which is not inherently wrong. It's just not the entire picture. So I can stand here right now and I can grip the floor as well as I want, but my legs and my hips and all of that can be completely loose and relaxed, which means if I'm under a heavy load or something were to try and hit me off balance or whatever, I don't have any stability beyond the ankle joint. So when we're talking about rooting and grounding, we're not just talking about how your feet interact with the floor. We're talking about your entire relationship and your ability to pull yourself down into the floor. And that happens from the pelvis or the hip down. So an easier way to think about this would be like bracing is how we stabilize ourselves from kind of the pelvis or the hip up to the shoulder. This whole wobbly segment here around the spine that we need to brace to hold in position. And then grounding is how we stabilize ourselves then from the hip or the pelvis down to the floor. And obviously when we do them together, we create a whole rigid structure. Now, intrinsically, we kind of know how to do this, but we forget, we kind of get lost with it. So those of you who have got like young kids, or maybe you've got like a young niece or a nephew or anything like that, right? They're on the floor and they want to be picked up. So you bend over and you pick them up. Let's say they weigh 30 pounds, 40 pounds, whatever, right? You can pick them up with relative ease. That same child then, niece, nephew, whatever it might be, when they don't want to be picked up, how much do they weigh? Way harder, right? They haven't suddenly gotten heavier, they haven't gotten denser, gravity hasn't gotten stronger. They've just stood there, looked at you, about to pick them up and gone, nuh-uh, and gone, that. Whatever that is, right? That is rooting, that's grounding. It's like, I don't want to be taken away from the floor, so I'm going to pull myself down into the floor and root all of my weight down low. My center of mass is going to drop down low. And that's exactly what this process is. Now, for some of you, this might be easier to get your head around, at least at start, on something like a bench press. So let me just show you what I mean here. We can probably all agree that if we're holding a heavy load on the bench press, we don't want to be holding it, at least at arm's length. We don't want to be holding it with our pecs, our front delts and our triceps, and just holding it by pushing into the bar. Because then they're going to be exhausted by the time we get the bar down and have to reverse the movement, right? So if I'm here and I unrack the bar, I could hold this bar in position by actively pushing into it. My arms get effectively longer, and now my triceps, my front delts, and my pecs are all working to stop this bar kind of nose diving down to me, right? Or, as we all kind of commonly like to cue, I could pull this into my back. See, the difference there is this is me pressing away, and now this is me sinking that weight into my structure and putting that weight into my upper back and my lats. Now, when I'm in this position, holding it in this manner, there is almost no pressure on my triceps, my front delts, and my pecs at all. The weight is quite well held by my lats, and then I'm in a position where I can actually pull the bar down and I can treat it like a row as opposed to pressing it up to stop it falling under control. So we can probably agree that in the context of benching a heavy load, it's a lot better to be able to put that weight into our back, our biceps, our lats, everything else, and then use that to control the eccentric so that the pecs, front delts, the triceps, etc. then are free to perform the concentric phase. But now, let's take that principle, now we apply it to a squat, right? So I'm up here, I'm at the top of a heavy squat, and what most of us are doing in this scenario is pushing up into the weight to stop it pushing us down into the floor. What that is doing though is obviously using your quads and your glutes to extend the knee and the hip. So they're actively working to stop the weight compressing you, but it's also pushing our center of gravity up here, which is going to make us more unstable. If we take the analogy here, what we do on the bench press, what we want to be doing instead is going from this position where I'm pushing up and trying to stop the weight pushing down on me. I want to almost yield to the weight and pull the weight into my structure. So now the weight is going down through my structure straight into the floor and absorbed by the floor. So now I'm more stable, my center of mass is lower, and also now my quads and my glutes are not doing anything in this position. My glutes can be completely relaxed. Instead, I've got other muscles that are helping to ground me and root me into the floor now. So they're going to be what help control me on the way down on that squat now, as opposed to me pushing up to resist it. So what we're going to do is kind of break down how you can create a feel for that sensation, should we say, and also the things that really need to be in place to allow you to do it. So if you've watched the bracing video, which I sincerely hope you have, by now you're probably already fed up of hearing about the importance of having a neutral pelvis. But unfortunately, that's going to be a running theme. And there's a reason for that, right? Because finding a neutral pelvis is going to be key for your ability to root down into the floor. And I know that sounds strange, but if we think about it like those of you who have any experience with sprinting or jumping or any kind of athletic training, you're probably familiar with the term triple extension, which basically refers to the ankle, the knee, and the hip all extending simultaneously. And that's what we use to sprint, to run, and to jump. Essentially, anytime we want to leave the floor, we want triple extension. That is the mechanism by which we leave the ground. So now the role of grounding or rooting, whatever you want to call it, is the polar opposite. We don't want to leave the ground. We want to pull ourselves down into the ground as hard as humanly possible. So actually now we need to focus on the opposite. Instead of triple extension, we want triple flexion. So we want the ankle, the knee, and the hip to flex to some degree to help ground us down into the floor. And now if we don't have the pelvis in a neutral position, well, straight away, what we're going to end up with is the hamstrings and the hip flexors are going to be in a lengthened position, and they can't contract properly and pull us down into the floor. And in fact, a big part of this whole equation or problem for people is because they're pushing into the floor and these muscles are relaxed, that's why they end up almost permanently in anterior pelvic tilt. Whereas right now, if I just stand here and I push into the floor, I've got anterior pelvic tilt and an arch in my back. Whereas if I now stand in the same position, all I do now is root and pull down instead, now my tailbone is down. Because we're using different muscles to control the pelvis and what we want to do with it. So we need to learn, how do we get the pelvis in the position we want? Because most of us are going to be stuck here, like this, and you're going to have no idea how to get here. Very simple, okay? So this is what I want you to do to get in a position where you're familiar with how it feels to have your pelvis tucked and your tailbone down and long or pointed at the floor, whatever makes sense to you. You're gonna stand with your feet together. What you're gonna do then is create a 90-degree angle with your feet. Give or take, it's gonna be there, okay? Now, if I stand in this position, I can lock my knees like so. If I go into maximal posterior pelvic tilt, so the tailbone tucking down and under, if you watch what happens to my knees now, if I go from here, I tilt, we end up in like a Charlie Chaplin-esque stance. That means you've done the right thing, okay? So what we're gonna do from that position, I'll do this again from the side to demonstrate. From this position, I want you to go on tiptoes. In this position now, you will be able to get your pelvis tucked in even more. And because we're on tiptoes, you're now not gonna have any ankle mobility restrictions. So I want you to squat down, keeping that tailbone as low as humanly possible and the pelvis underneath. So just squat down nice and low, tailbone stays pointed down, and just sit down at the bottom. This is what it feels like to be at the bottom of the squat with your tailbone and your pelvis underneath you. Hang out here for a second, and then it can always help to just put your hands back here to feel what's going on. From there, I want you to push up without your tailbone kicking out. And what will happen when most people do it is they'll go like that and they'll lose it. So again, I'll show you from the side. Stand with the feet together, out to 90 degrees. Now I do my pelvic tilt at the top. So I go under Now my feet, my knees, I'm sorry, have splayed out. I'm gonna go keep this down now, go up on tiptoes. Keep this pulled down low, squat down. Hold in this bottom position. And now the goal is, can I keep this pulled down as I slowly push up? That drill, obviously we're not going to squat that way, right? But that drill is going to put you in a position where it's incredibly easy relative to normal to get the pelvis in the position that we want, which is that tucked long tailbone position. That's going to act as a transition to allow us to get it over here in the squat or anything else. That could be a great part of your warm-up, but what I would encourage you to do at start is to use no weight and just practice being able to go down slow and come up slow without that tailbone moving. When you can string together a couple of reps, say 3 or 5 seconds on the way down, 3 or 5 seconds on the way up, without this moving position, now we're in a position where we can start to introduce maybe a kettlebell, or maybe even do it with an empty bar, because as soon as we start trying to introduce some form of hip hinge here, it's going to be much easier to lose this. The reason that that's so advantageous for you is because you're up on tiptoes. I can squat down almost entirely upright. I don't have to worry about the hips flexing or extending, which would make that considerably harder to control. So that is task 1. Learn how to find your pelvis position and learn how to tuck it whilst you go through a very upright squat. So step 2 in our task of rooting into the floor properly now is to start thinking about the feet and getting the feet doing the right thing. But the reason we need to do the pelvis first is because the pelvis is going to have a downstream effect on how the feet sit on the floor. So again, Noah, if you can just pan down for me now. If I stand here with my feet, for me, just a little bit wider than hip width, this is going to be a little bit subtle. But if I go into anterior pelvic tilt, so I arch my back hard as possible, now I've got like what you'd call like a duck butt position. Now my feet have caved in. I've got all this pressure in here, very little pressure out here. So now what happens is, because lifters are in this position, they grip and they're trying to compensate for this natural pronation. They just twist out hard as they can and try to force it. But the problem is what they're fighting isn't in their feet, it's in their pelvis. So again, when I'm very, very arched, this is how my feet want to sit. Now, if I go from this position and tuck my pelvis under as far as I can, we go to there. Now, I haven't actually thought about my feet at all, but now I have pressure on the outside of my foot here, and now I've got a more pronounced arch just from adjusting my pelvis. So again, let's go through that again. This is me maximally tucked underneath. Arch is large, lots of pressure on the outside of the foot. Essentially what most people are trying to achieve by doing this whole twisting out procedure the whole time. If I go into anterior pelvic tilt, maximally, the arch caves in. Lots of pressure on the inside, which you're gonna have to correct for, which you will do unsuccessfully. Now I go back to posterior tilt, and they're already in the position that we pretty much want them to be in at the start. So that's why we need to set the or learn how to set the pelvis first, because if we don't, it's very similar to the bracing video, where if this isn't in the position we want, you're gonna try to do a dozen different things to compensate for the fact that everything's being thrown off because the pelvis isn't where we want it to be. Pelvis is an anterior pelvic tilt, the rib cage comes up. You have to crunch down really hard, maybe even lean forward to get it to stay down, or you just end up squatting like this. Okay, the pelvis is an anterior pelvic tilt, the feet want to cave in. So you have to focus on, you have to twist out, try and like spread the floor super hard, push into the outside of your shoe, just to compensate for the fact that your foot is sat on the floor like that. So that's why that's important. Now, when we look at what we do with our feet, right? Gripping with your foot is not the same as gripping with your hand. Now, we think it is though. So when you say grip the floor to most people, what we're gonna see is this. Like a shrinking of the foot, okay? But this is actually less surface area than when it's relaxed. Because we think grip, hand gets small, we think grip, foot gets small. But this is going to give us a smaller surface area on the floor and mean that we have less stability. Now, what we really want from the foot in this scenario is the largest possible footprint, so to speak, humanly possible. So what that's going to involve is, first we're going to pick the toes up off the floor. This is going to put us in a position where our arch is a little bit bigger. And now we're going to spread the toes as wide as possible. Now, most of you are going to suck at this, and that's fine. And then what you're going to do is place the foot down, or toes down, I'm sorry, with them spread as humanly possible. Mine's not great, I've been working on it, okay? Now, the wider you can get this spread, the bigger of a footprint you have, the more stability your foot's going to have on the floor. And the more active your arch is going to be here, the more able you're going to be able to withstand any kind of perturbations or changes in balance or anything like that. Now, the problem most of us are going to have is you're going to take off your shoes and your socks or whatever, because we all wear cool sneakers all day because, you know, Nikes are nice. We have feet that are kind of like this. Your big toe might be angled in, your little toe almost definitely is angled in because that's where most of us are. If your hand was stuck like this, you'd probably assume that was a problem. We tend to ignore it in our feet. But obviously, if this is our neutral foot posture, we're going to be very limited in how far we can spread. You know, if we're stuck here, we might be able to get there. But if we started here, we would be able to get there. So for most of you, this is going to be a struggle, but it can be a pretty easy fix. Obviously, footwear plays into this quite a lot, right? But in reality, one of the best things you can do is just what I call foot love drills, which is basically wedging your fingers in between your toes and then just spending time moving them around and separating them and basically breaking up all the adhesions, lengthening all the soft tissues and connective tissues between your toes, so that then when you go to root, there's more space in between them and they can spread out and reach a bigger area, okay? So when you're sat watching Netflix, whatever it might be, I don't care, go on the sofa, jam your fingers in between your toes and literally just move them around and spread them. Okay, you can do like independent toe drills to help the movement then. You know, you can basically lock most of the toes in place and just move the big toe. You can lock the other toes in place and just move the little toe. But in my experience, if your foot posture is terrible to start with, you're gonna have really limited results in that because the structure you're working from is pretty poor. If you get your foot posture in a better position where your toes now kind of sit like so, pointing slightly apart, now you're in a position where all the toes are actually able to function properly, and who knows, you might not need to do any of that stuff, okay? So we've now got 2 steps to rooting properly. We've got setting the pelvis underneath. So we're here, this is me in anterior pelvic tilt. We've got finding that position, which you're gonna use the tiptoe squat to find. So this is down. I can already feel my adductors on the front of my leg in this position. That's a good thing. Now, holding this to grip the floor with the feet, to have them do their job properly. I'm gonna pick the toes up. I'm gonna spread the toes as wide as humanly possible and then lay them down here. And then hold. Now this already I haven't done anything yet, but holding my pelvis in this position and actively gripping the floor with that large spread environment is already making a lot of things work from my tailbone down through my adductors into my tibialis. So we're already getting to a place where passively even, we're creating quite a lot of tension, but we can learn to ratchet this up. So the next drill that I want to show you is basically a way of kind of cheating the system to give you an inkling of the sensation you're looking for when you start doing these things correctly. So what we're going to do is an isometric in a very wide horse stance, Mabu stance. So what we're going to do to achieve that, you're going to start with your feet together, and then I'll demonstrate this from the side too. You're going to go 90 degrees like we did for the tiptoe squat. Then you're also going to go 90 degrees again. So that would be 2, 3, 4, 5, super wide. And then from that position, you're going to point your feet straight forward. Super weird stance, unless maybe you're an equipped powerlifter, you spent a little bit of time this way. What we're going to do in that position, and nice and relaxed, that's when you drop down to whatever position you can, which is going to be pretty low, okay? Now, what we're basically doing is forcing you into a position where it's almost impossible to go into anterior pelvic tilt, because to do that, I would have to arch really hard and my knees would have to flare super wide. It's difficult to do that. You're gonna have to do a lot wrong to get there. When I'm here naturally, my pelvis is already tucked under because we're in this position here. Now, what you're gonna do in this position, Tuck your tailbone down, like we've been talking about. Feet up, spread and grab. Now from this position, I want you to imagine that like a 500-pound barbell is about to land on your back. So from there, you're gonna push into the floor. Now, when you do this, if you're already in anterior pelvic tilt, it will probably just tuck under more. And what we're looking for in this position is the glutes to stay underneath you, and you should feel your adductors fire up. And just see how much tension you can ratchet up in this position, okay? Now, what could work really well here is if you've got a good training partner, they could step behind you, push down on you, and you've got to resist them. So you're taking the voluntary aspect out of it, right? Just spend some time here actively pushing into the floor hard as you can. Look at the position of my feet. Even though I'm in this super wide stance, they're not caving in. Because I'm tucked under in this position, now when I push and stay tucked, the feet actually spread out and go out and the knees spread out with them. As opposed to if I was in anterior pelvic tilt, I'd be here. If I push here, feet are pronated, the knees cave in more, and I'm in a weaker position. Whereas if I go into posterior tilt, the knees open up, the feet get a bigger arch and pressure goes onto the outside, and now I can push hard in this position, okay? So that would be number one. Practice that, do 20, 30, 40 seconds, whatever it needs to be. Spend some time seeing how much you can ratchet up tension in that position without going here. If you go here, the feet will collapse in and the knees will collapse in. You will know absolutely straight away. Okay, so that's how we kind of cheat the system to get the end result we're looking for in terms of sensation and tension. That's how you want to feel to some degree at the bottom of your squat. When you do this well, the best way I can summarize it would be that when you get to the bottom of the squat, if you do this stuff well, it will feel like your legs are more directly underneath you. It will feel like you're directly stacked on top of your hips and your feet and can push straight up into the bar. That's the sensation you're looking for. You might not get there straight away, but that's the best way to summarize how this is going to feel when you get into this better posture. Now, we just did a very, very wide Mabu horse stance to cheat the system. Now, the next drill that you can do with like a training partner or your partner at home, doesn't really matter, would be another overcoming isometric in a position where we don't have to do it right. And we're focusing on not pushing up but pulling down. So what we're going to do this time, again, if we start with our feet together, we go 1, 2, 3, now put them straight forward. So, you know, we're maybe just outside shoulder width, perhaps, depending on how wide your shoulders are, how long your legs are. From that position then, I want you to just set the tailbone down like we did on that tiptoe squat and set the feet. So the feet up, spread, grip, tailbone under, go down to a mini squat. So we're just here. Now what you're gonna do, I can't do it because I have a training partner right now, right? You're gonna have your significant other, your training partner, whatever, maybe have them stand up on something so they can push down harder. They're gonna go over you and push down on you. They're gonna try and push your hips towards the floor. Your goal is to resist them, not by pushing up, but by pulling down. So the idea is that the force that they're pushing down into your body, you're dissipating down through your pelvis, through your adductors, and down into your feet. Sounds really weird at first, I know, but basically your goal is to just, every time they ratchet up the tension, you just pull down a little bit harder. And maybe you drop down a little bit, that's fine. But the idea is that the more tension that goes up, you just ratchet how hard you pull down to the point where then, because we've got the hip flexors, the hamstrings, and the adductors doing the work, pulling us into the floor, the quads and the glutes aren't really doing anything. So once they're pulling down with reasonable force, what I want you to do then is flip the switch and from that position, push up with your quads and your glutes, because those haven't been doing anything. You've successfully absorbed all that force that's pushing you down with all those other muscles. So the quads and glutes are now free to push against the resistance that you've pretty much already absorbed. So we're here, pelvis under, toes grip, mini squat. Here, again, have them put their hands on your traps or your shoulders, whatever makes more sense. Spend a minute in this position. And the goal is, don't have your quads and glutes burning by the end of that time, because they shouldn't be doing the work here. We shouldn't be pushing up, we should be pulling down. So that's one test. If you're doing this well, 40 seconds in, 50 seconds in, whatever, your feet might hurt, Your adductors might hurt, your hip flexors, your abs might hurt, but your quads and your glutes shouldn't be hurting. They shouldn't be burning with lactic acid because we're not using them yet. And then as they build up that tension, you just ratchet down, you pull down harder, you pull down harder, you create more tension through this V. Okay, they call this horse stance because the idea is that you create your own horse. Meaning, from here, this inside shape here, we pull as much tension and stability into that point. We create the horse on which we sit. And then once they've put a reasonable amount of effort in, then you slowly just reverse it and push up. That would be drill number one. Now, if you don't have a significant other or a training partner or anything like that, another way we can do this quite simply is to get a kettlebell or whatever it is that you want. I'm going to do a very similar thing. I'm going to hold it like a regular goblet squat. We're going to get in that stance, which is just outside shoulder width. The feet are pointed straight forward once again. We're going to go pelvis under, toes up, flared, and down. Partial squat. And now we just do an isometric here. But the isometric, again, is done by pulling. So how hard can you pull yourself into the floor? Not push up into the kettlebell. How hard can you pull down? And again, the test here is you're not going to do this for 10 seconds or 20 seconds or anything like that. You're going to do this for a minute or longer, whatever it might be, so you can feel what gets tired when I do this. And if we're looking at adductors and hamstrings and hip flexors and your feet and your ankles, then you're doing it right. If you're here and your quads and your glutes are screaming at you, then you're doing it wrong. And you just need to spend time here. Now, I would say it's probably better done with your eyes shut. Just the less stuff you have to distract you, the better. But then if you do have a training partner that you can do this with, when your eyes are shut, to level this up a little bit, they could come around and just like give you a bit of a tap. Push you one way, push you the other way. Ideally as random as possible, because if I'm here and I'm successfully rooted into the floor, I can compensate for those perturbations, those movements very easily. If I'm here totally loose and relaxed, someone were to come into me, I got nothing. I'm just going. So I'm here, and because I've got the eyes shut, I can't prepare for anything. So if that touch comes here or on my back, whatever, if I root down harder, I've got a more stable base to compensate for those from. So this really is something that's not just going to carry over to your lifting, although it will make all your lifting better, even bench press. But if you're an MMA fighter or anyone who does anything where they have to stand up and apply force to anything, learning to root yourself into the ground is going to have pretty pronounced effects.